When I was a little boy, I wanted more than anything to be a professional baseball player. I wanted to be a big league pitcher. My hero was Sandy Koufax. Now, the difficulty of him being my hero, he was a fabulous pitcher, but he was left-handed, and I'm right-handed. He was kind of lanky and tall, and I have always been short and stubby. So, but that didn't dim my aspiration, my desire to be a big league ball player. I loved playing baseball. When I was a grade school boy in the summertime, my brother and I would wolf down our cereal for breakfast, and then we were gone out of the house as soon as we could get out of there. And we met up at the vacant lot next to Rodney Evans' house, and we'd play baseball until we had to go home for lunch, and then we'd go back out and play in the afternoon until we had to go home for supper, and sometimes we'd go back out and play until it was too dark to play. If you're my age and you were into baseball, I'll bet your story was real similar, especially if you grew up in a little town like I grew up in, where it was safe. We didn't. I don't think my parents ever worried. We're on our own out there, and it was not a concern because it was safe. Well, really, there's only one thing that kept me from being a Major League Baseball player: talent. I just didn't have it. The aspiration, this deep desire, I mean, today doesn't bother me that I never was a Major League Baseball player. And there are times when I'm glad I wasn't. But the aspiration, I still have a memory of that strong, strong desire. what did you, as a kid, what did you want to be and do? Well, I think some of us grew up not feeling like we could make that choice, but that choice was going to be made for us by someone other than us. I didn't so much feel that but I there were times when I wanted, I had aspirations for something that just wasn't going to happen. But the aspiration is a good thing. And Paul writes about aspiration. And this is from 1 Timothy 3, beginning in verse 1, where we touched on this. We began this last time. Here is a trustworthy saying. In other words, Timothy, mark it down. It's almost like he's saying, this will be on the exam. This is worth remembering. Whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. The noble task of overseer. We talked last time about when Paul, we have translated in the New International Version, overseer comes from a Greek word that could easily also be translated elder, presbyter. And I shared with you last time that all the churches that I've ever served in had elders and had a high value for elders. And they had a very strong understanding of the profile, the character profile of an elder. But none of them had a strong, reasoned idea of what does an elder do. We know who he's supposed to be and how he's supposed to be, but we don't know. Boy, and it was frustrating to them. It's like, have you ever had a job where there was no job description, but there were high expectations for your performance? That's a tough job. I'll just put it this way. If you get the chance to take a job like that, don't, because it's not going to work out well. Here's because there's no constraint on me, I get to tell you what I think. And from the very first soul care was Stevie Boy. So here we go. I believe the church is God's family. And when the church is at its best, it functions as a healthy family functions. This is the evidence for this, the implications for this are all over both the Old and New Testaments. In the Old Testament, Israel was organized as a huge family, a family of families. We call it tribalism, but that's what it was. Now, in the New Testament, when the church was established, it quickly became a kind of tribe. And when Paul writes about the church, the one word picture that most often gets used by preachers and teachers, Bible preachers and teachers, is the body. And that comes from a couple of places where Paul talks about the church as a body. And the church is like a body, where each member, each part of the body has a orchestrated function. And each part of the body has its significance to the whole of the body, so that there's no part of the body that doesn't matter. I suppose maybe the one exception might be appendix. But there are parts of your body that if they go away, you got to compensate for that. Okay. I agree. The church, in terms of the entity of the church, the body is a very viable word picture for how it should function. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul describes the work of the church. And one of the things he says is, hey, this is not the place for me to go into the whole big thing on that, but the parts of the body have to be in a cooperative, orchestrated symphony or an harmony, or else the body can't do what it's designed to do. Okay. But there are many, many, many more times in the New Testament in particular where the church, and actually now that I hear myself saying that, the reason that it's in the New Testament is because the church didn't exist until the New Testament. The nation of Israel, the family of families existed, but the church, that was unique, and it began on the day of Pentecost. Okay, so now we got the church, and Paul writes about the church. Luke writes about the church. Peter writes about the church. John writes about the church. And one of the biggest markers for how these people and their followers thought about the church is so obvious that it's easy to not see. And it is in this. When people within the church, men and women within the church, addressed each other, what term did they use? And I'm fishing for it, but I'm going to just tell you. They called each other brother Saul, sister Aquila. Brother, sister. That's family terminology. And it's like most people just they miss it totally, because it's so often is there. And in some churches today, we still call one another brother and sister. Paul writes that part of the objective, part of the pursuit of the church is to be generous with the household of God. He talks about the church in terms of a household. Well, that's a family. And it's not just the biological family, but it's the household. And in Jewish culture, Grecian culture, Roman culture as well, household was everybody associated with that family unit. So it would have to do with extended family members, and which, by the way, often there were 2 or 3 generations in the same household. I mean, in the same physical building or compounds, however you want to look at it. There were also servants and, in some cases, slaves. Those would have been considered the household. But it was a family unit. So my contention is that the church is God's family. And each of us within it are related by virtue of our adoption by God into his family at the cost of the blood of Jesus. Okay, that's a fairly complicated statement, but the bottom line is, if God's church is his family, and I believe it is, and I'm not going to go into it any more deeply than that, just for the sake of time, but if the church is God's family, then it will function best when it functions as a healthy family. Now, there's a problem with that. In our culture, and it has... We're not the only culture that has had to struggle with this. In our culture, we rarely see a fully healthy, functional family. We often see families that are deeply dysfunctional. They're deeply broken. And sometimes we think it's impossible to have a functional family, a healthy family. And that's not true. But I believe that part of the reason that our churches sometimes become dysfunctional is because we don't have an idea of what a functional, healthy family looks like to bring into this family of God. And I think we probably have it turned around. I think what needs to happen is if we could come to understand more clearly what does health and vitality and functionality within God's family look like, that will inform and educate us on what our family biologically should be like. All right. Can you tell? I could go on and on and on about this, but I won't. Not now. But I'm reserving the right that maybe later I will. In a healthy family, what happens when the parents are removed from the family, when they are physically not present? Well, in the best case, the children then would be raised by other family members, or the oldest, most mature members of the family then would assume the role of leadership within the family. Now, I'm telling you this because I think elders, these overseers, God intended to be in that position. They are the older siblings within the family, and not just chronologically older. They are the mature siblings within the family who are mature enough to make decisions and choices that will nurture the health and well-being of the whole family. Now, often those decisions that are for the health and well-being of the family may be expensive, more expensive to this mature sibling than to the rest of the family. That's how it works. In a church, if an elder, if an overseer believes that their role is to dominate and rule and get this family where it needs to be, that's not an expression of maturity. A mature sibling would say, I have this deep love for my family, and I want to do any and everything I can to nurture the health and well-being of the family. My own well-being is second to theirs. My own status is not the point. The point is, I want to contribute to the health of the family. And I believe the function of an elder, the job of an elder, is to address the health and well-being of the church family. Now, it would take me about 5 hours of lecture to crack that open to my own satisfaction. So I'm going to give it a rest. But we're going to pick it up next time with, so what is the character profile of this older sibling? Next time we get together on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.